The moment I stepped into these abandoned Colorado towns, a strange weight hit me, like the air itself remembered who had walked here before. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, almost judging, pressing down on my chest. Shadows clung to empty streets, and every creak of old wood felt deliberate, like someone or something was watching. I kept asking myself, why do these places feel alive, even after decades of abandonment? And the deeper I walked, the more I realized the history is only the beginning. If you're enjoying this journey through these creepy towns, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Traveling Guide Hub. There's so much more spine-chilling adventure waiting for you. 1. St. Elmo, Colorado. I remember the first thing that struck me about St. Elmo, Colorado wasn't fear, it was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that makes you notice your own breathing. And within minutes, I understood why so many people leave this place unsettled, even when nothing happens at all. St. Elmo was founded in 1880 during Colorado's mining boom, a bustling hub for the Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railroad. Hotels, saloons, schools, hundreds of miners and their families, it thrived high in the mountains, almost 10,000 feet above sea level. Winters were merciless, accidents in the nearby mines were frequent, and supply shipments were unreliable. When the railroad bypassed the town and the mines shut down, people didn't flee overnight. They just stopped believing the town would take care of them. By the early 1920s, St. Elmo was largely abandoned, not because of a single disaster, but because surviving there quietly became impossible. That history is easy to read on a sign. What's harder to explain is how it feels to stand there now. As I walked along the dirt road, the temperature dropped suddenly, even though the sun was still high. The buildings seemed preserved rather than ruined, as if the residents had stepped out for a moment, planning to return. Footsteps echoed along the wooden boardwalks, slow ones, spaced out, like someone walking without any hurry, even though I could see that I was alone. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was the way sound carries here, but it didn't feel random. A door creaked slightly as the wind passed, though the movement didn't sound like wind. It sounded deliberate, cautious. Visitors often mention the same thing, a heavy, uncomfortable pressure in their chest, the kind that makes you lower your voice without realizing it. I didn't see anything, and yet I felt watched. Small, subtle things, but they added up. The wind shifted through the trees, carrying a sound I couldn't place, and it stayed with me longer than I expected. Even now, I still wonder, was that feeling just my imagination reacting to history? Or is St. Elmo the kind of place that remembers everyone who walks through it? 2. Independence, Colorado. The first thing that hits you when you arrive at Independence, Colorado is the altitude. The air is thin, crisp, almost biting, and for reasons I couldn't explain at the time, it felt like my body was reacting before my mind caught up. Even before I set foot on the cracked dirt paths, there was a subtle tension, a quiet insistence that this place wasn't quite done with the people who had walked here before. Independence was founded in 1879 as a silver mining town tucked deep in the Sawatch Range. For a brief time, it thrived. Saloons, a post office, dozens of miners' cabins, all buzzing with the hope of silver. But the mines were difficult, dangerous, and expensive to operate. When silver prices collapsed in 1893, compounded by harsh winters and supply shortages, the town's residents didn't leave all at once. They simply stopped believing the town could provide for them. Families packed what they could and drifted away, and by the end of the decade, Independence had largely emptied, faded not with a single dramatic event, but with the slow, relentless weight of financial desperation and isolation. That history is easy to read in old photos and fading plaques. Standing there now is harder to make sense of. Walking past the skeletal remains of cabins, I noticed a single metallic clink, sharp and brief, like something had dropped and never been picked up. My steps echoed unevenly, and the wind didn't feel random. It slipped along corners in a careful, deliberate way. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was the way sound carries in the mountains, but it didn't feel accidental. In one corner, the air pressed heavier against my chest, and I had to consciously slow my breathing, aware of the subtle, unexplainable pull that tugged at my attention. Near the old post office, the quiet pressed in so hard I became aware of my own heartbeat. No one was there, yet it felt as if the town itself were observing, testing me in small, almost imperceptible ways. Each tiny sound, each shift in the wind, added to the weight that seemed to settle on my shoulders. Even after I left, that weight lingered, a quiet reminder that this town hasn't finished with its past. And sometimes I wonder, is Independence a place that never really finished letting go of the people who left? 3 Animas Forks, Colorado. The first thing that hit me when I arrived at Animas Forks, Colorado was the stillness. The town sits high in the San Juan Mountains, nearly 11,200 feet above sea level, and the air is thin enough that every breath feels deliberate. For reasons I couldn't explain at the time, my skin prickled almost immediately, like the town itself knew I didn't belong. Even before stepping onto the icy paths, I sensed that this place had stories it wasn't ready to let go. Animas Forks was founded in 1873 as a mining town, carved into steep mountain slopes to support the surrounding gold and silver mines. At its peak, it had around 450 residents, along with hotels, saloons, and a post office, all clinging to the mountainsides. Life here was brutal. Harsh winters, avalanches, and treacherous access made survival a daily struggle. When the mines declined in the late 1900s and the cost of operation became too high, people left slowly, one cabin at a time. By the early 20th century, Animas Forks was completely abandoned, a ghost town frozen mid-story where snow and wind became the only constants. That history is easy to read in the faded timber and rusted roofs. Standing there now is harder to make sense of. Walking past the old boarding house, a single metallic clang echoed from somewhere uphill, sharp, abrupt, and impossibly deliberate. My boots crunched on the frozen path, but the sound didn't match my steps. Maybe it was the wind moving through the gullies, or maybe it wasn't. The cabins leaned toward each other in strange angles, amplifying the silence in pockets that felt deliberate. In some areas, the air pressed heavier against my chest, and I found myself slowing my breathing almost instinctively. Visitors often mention this, the sense that the town watches you, tracks your movements, noticing even the smallest step. Near the post office, the quiet pressed in so strongly that I became aware of my own heartbeat in my ears. No doors moved, no one was visible, and yet the faint metallic echoes and shifting wind made the town feel alive in the quietest, most unsettling way. Each small sound, each subtle shift added weight to the atmosphere until it was impossible to ignore. Even after leaving, that awareness followed me down the mountain, lingering longer than any cold or snow could. And sometimes I wonder, is Animas Forks a place that doesn't want anyone else walking through its silence? 4. Cripple Creek, Colorado. The first thing that hit me when I arrived at Cripple Creek, Colorado, was the strange contrast between life and decay. The town is nestled in a valley, surrounded by jagged peaks, and the air carries a crisp, almost metallic chill. For reasons I couldn't explain, a subtle tension settled in my shoulders, like the town was quietly assessing me before I even took my first step. Even among the restored buildings and small casinos, there was an edge, a feeling that not everything here had moved on. Cripple Creek was founded in 1890 during the Colorado Gold Rush and quickly became one of the most productive gold mining towns in the state. At its height, thousands of miners, shopkeepers, and families crowded the streets, living amid a chaotic mix of opportunity and danger. Life was never easy, Mine collapses, flash floods, and harsh winters were constant threats. When the gold veins began to dwindle in the early 20th century, many residents left, but the town never fully died. Parts of it were abandoned, parts persisted, and a strange in-between remained, a living town layered over its ghostly past. That history is visible in the old wooden facades and rusted equipment scattered along the outskirts. Standing there now, though, it's impossible not to feel the shadows of all that effort and ambition left behind. As I wandered past a row of half-empty storefronts, a metallic scrape echoed somewhere down an alley, a harsh, brief sound like someone dragging a cart across a boardwalk, though I saw no one. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it wasn't. The alley seemed narrower than it should, the shadows deepened in odd ways, and my chest felt heavy, almost instinctively making me pause. Visitors often describe this: sounds that don't match what you see, air that feels thicker in some corners, like the town itself is remembering every person who ever walked these streets. Near the old Gold King saloon, the quiet pressed against me, and I became acutely aware of my heartbeat and the crunch of gravel underfoot. Nothing moved, yet the town felt alive in a patient, almost deliberate way, as if it were observing me. Each subtle sound, each odd shadow layered on top of the others until the tension became tangible. Even as I left, that weight lingered, settling into my memory like the dust of centuries. And sometimes I wonder, is Cripple Creek a town that allows visitors only to leave carrying a piece of its past with them, whether they like it or not? 5. Silver Plume, Colorado. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at Silver Plume, Colorado was how quiet it was. So quiet that even the wind felt muted. The town sits steep against the slopes of the Front Range, and the air was sharp and thin, making every breath deliberate. For reasons I couldn't explain, my shoulders tensed immediately, as if the town itself was measuring my presence, testing whether I belonged. Even though the street seemed almost normal at first glance, there was an undercurrent that made me wary of every step. Silver Plume was founded in 1873 as a silver mining hub along the scenic Georgetown Loop. Miners flocked here, building homes, businesses, and a train line to ship ore. Life was grueling. Steep mountains, avalanches, and unpredictable winters made survival difficult. When silver prices crashed in the 1890s and mining became less profitable, residents gradually left, abandoning buildings rather than tearing them down. By the early 20th century, Silver Plume was largely deserted, a town frozen between prosperity and decay, where the mountains seemed to guard the memories of the people who had once lived there. That history is visible in the weathered facades and old wooden walkways, but standing there now, it's harder to process than any photograph or plaque. As I wandered along the main street, a metallic ping rang out from somewhere above the town, brief, high-pitched, like a tool striking metal and then falling silent. My steps on the wooden planks echoed, but they didn't match the sound. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it wasn't. Shadows lingered in corners where none should exist, and the air pressed heavier in certain spots, tugging at my chest. I slowed my breathing almost instinctively, aware that the town might be watching me, tracking me in subtle, deliberate ways. Locals and visitors describe the same sensation: sounds that don't align with what you see, air that feels almost sentient, and the sense that Silver Plume hasn't fully let go of its past. Near the old train depot, the quiet pressed down so strongly that I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Nothing moved, yet the town felt alive in a patient, deliberate way. Each tiny sound, each shadow, each shift in air added to the cumulative weight, making it impossible to ignore. Even after I left, that pressure lingered, settling into my thoughts long after the mountains faded behind me. And sometimes I wonder, is Silver Plume a place that hasn't finished with the people who wander through it, quietly letting them carry a piece of its past with them? 6. Caribou, Colorado. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at Caribou, Colorado, was how the silence felt almost unnatural. The town sits deep in the Rockies, and the thin, sharp air made every breath deliberate. For reasons I couldn't explain, my body instinctively stiffened, as if the town itself knew I didn't belong. Even before stepping onto the old paths, there was a subtly tactile tension in the ground and air that made me pause with each footfall. Caribou was founded in 1870 during Colorado's gold rush, and for a time it thrived as a mining town. Miners' cabins, a few stores, and a post office clung to the steep hillsides, all connected by narrow dirt paths. Life was harsh and unforgiving. Winter snows, avalanches, and isolation made survival a constant challenge. When the gold veins ran dry and the cost of maintaining the mines became too high, residents gradually left, one cabin at a time, leaving behind buildings frozen mid-life and a sense of unfinished history that hangs in the air even today. That history is visible in the weathered timbers and crumbling stone foundations, but standing there now, it feels more than history. It feels like a presence. As I walked past the remains of the post office, a metallic scrape rang out somewhere uphill, brief, deliberate, almost purposeful. My boots crunched on the frozen dirt, but the sound didn't match my steps. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it wasn't. Shadows clung to corners where none should exist, and the air pressed heavier in spots, tugging at my chest. I slowed my breathing, aware that the town might be watching, tracking my movements in subtle, deliberate ways. Locals and visitors often describe the same sensation: sounds that don't align with what you see, air that feels alive, a quiet insistence that this place remembers those who once lived there. Near the remnants of the general store, the quiet pressed down so strongly I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Nothing moved, yet the town felt alive in a patient, deliberate way. Each tiny sound, each shadow, each subtle shift in air added to the cumulative weight, making it impossible to ignore. Even after leaving, that weight lingered, settling into my thoughts long after the mountains faded behind me. And sometimes I wonder, is Caribou a place that doesn't want anyone else wandering through its silence, carrying a piece of its past, whether they realize it or not? 7 Ashcroft, Colorado. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at Ashcroft, Colorado, was how sharply the mountains pressed against the sky. The air was thin and icy, and each breath felt deliberate, almost intrusive. For reasons I couldn't explain, a weight settled in my chest the moment I stepped onto the cracked wooden sidewalks, as if the town itself was gauging me, quietly assessing whether I belonged. Even with the sun glinting off a few remaining structures, a subtle unease lingered in every shadow. Ashcroft was founded in 1880 during the silver mining boom, quickly attracting miners and their families. At its height, the town bustled with hundreds of residents, hotels, general stores, and saloons, all tucked into the steep, narrow valley. Life was relentless. Harsh winters, avalanches, and isolation made daily survival precarious. When silver prices collapsed in the early 1990s, people began leaving gradually, one building at a time. By the turn of the century, Ashcroft was nearly abandoned, leaving behind structures frozen mid-life and an unsettling sense of unfinished business that hangs in the air even today. That history is easy to see in the weathered facades, rusted roofs, and the occasional remaining signage. But standing there now, it's more than history. It feels like the town itself remembers. As I wandered past the old hotel, a metallic scrape echoed from somewhere above, a brief, deliberate sound, sharp and impossible to place. My steps on the sidewalk seemed louder than usual, but the sound didn't align with them. Maybe it was the wind or shifting boards, but maybe it wasn't. Shadows seemed to collect in places that should have been empty, and the air pressed heavy at odd intervals, tugging at my chest. I found myself slowing my breathing, acutely aware of the town's subtle presence, as if it was observing me in ways too quiet to name. Locals and visitors often describe this: sounds that defy explanation, an almost sentient stillness. the sense that Ashcroft hasn't entirely let go of its past. Near the old general store, the quiet pressed so strongly that I could hear the faint echo of my heartbeat in the wooden walls. Nothing moved, yet the town felt alive in a patient, deliberate way. Each creak, each shifting shadow, each subtle shift in air added to the cumulative weight, making it impossible to ignore. Even after I left, that weight lingered, embedding itself in my thoughts long after the mountains faded behind me. And sometimes I wonder, is Ashcroft a place that quietly keeps the memory of those who lived there, letting visitors carry a piece of its past whether they realize it or not? 8. Tin Cup, Colorado. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at Tin Cup, Colorado was the sudden stillness. The town sits high in the mountains, and the thin, biting air made every breath feel deliberate, almost like an effort. For reasons I couldn't explain, my body tensed instinctively, as if the town itself was aware of my presence, quietly judging whether I belonged. Even with sunlight reflecting off a few weathered buildings, a subtle unease lingered in the streets, making each step feel heavier than it should. Tin Cup was founded in 1878 as a silver mining town and quickly became a bustling hub for miners seeking fortune in the high Rockies. Cabins, stores, and a few saloons lined the narrow dirt paths, while a small post office served the scattered community. Life was harsh. Winter snowstorms, avalanches, and isolation were constant threats. When silver prices fell and mining operations declined, residents gradually left, one cabin at a time. By the early 20th century, Tin Cup was nearly deserted, leaving behind buildings frozen mid-life and a quiet sense of unfinished history that seems to linger in the thin mountain air even today. That history is evident in the weathered wooden facades, rusting signs, and the occasional abandoned tools. But standing there now, it's more than history. It feels alive in a subtle, almost sentient way. As I walked past the old saloon, a metallic ping echoed from somewhere above, high-pitched and deliberate. My footsteps on the boardwalks seemed louder than usual, but the sound didn't align with them. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it wasn't. Shadow seemed to cling in corners where none should exist, and the air pressed heavier in certain spots, tugging at my chest. I instinctively slowed my breathing, aware that the town might be quietly watching, tracking me in ways too subtle to name. Locals and visitors report similar sensations, unexplained sounds, air that feels alive, and a sense that Tin Cup hasn't fully released the people who once lived there. Near the old post office, the quiet pressed down so strongly I could hear the faint echo of my heartbeat in the wooden walls. Nothing moved, yet the town felt alive in a patient, deliberate way. Each metallic ping, each shadow, each subtle shift in the air layered into a weight that was impossible to ignore. Even after I left, that weight lingered, embedding itself in my thoughts long after the mountains disappeared behind me. And sometimes I wonder, is Tin Cup a place that quietly refuses to let visitors leave untouched, carrying pieces of its past whether they realize it or not? 9. Deerfield, Colorado. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at Deerfield, Colorado, was how the landscape itself seemed to hold its breath. The prairie stretched flat and empty, and the air was dry and sharp, making every step feel deliberate. For reasons I couldn't explain, my body tensed almost immediately, as if the town itself was aware of my presence, silently measuring me. Even though the ruins seemed small and unassuming, a subtle unease hung in the silence, making each step echo louder than it should. Deerfield was founded in 1910 as an African-American agricultural settlement, part of the movement for black homesteaders seeking independence in the West. Families built homes, schools, and small businesses, working the land under harsh conditions, drought, isolation, and the unpredictable prairie winds. Over time, economic hardship and environmental challenges forced residents to gradually abandon the town. By the 1940s, Deerfield was largely deserted, leaving behind structures frozen mid-life and a lingering sense of unfinished history that seems to hover in the empty fields even today. That history is visible in the crumbling walls of the old school and the weathered boards of abandoned homes. But standing there now, It's more than history. It feels as though the land itself remembers. As I walked past the remnants of the general store, a metallic clink rang out from somewhere nearby, a single, sharp note, deliberate yet fleeting. My boots scuffed the dry earth, but the sound didn't match my steps. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it wasn't. Shadows seemed to settle in places where none should be, and the dry air pressed heavier in certain spots, tugging at my chest. I slowed my breathing, aware that the town might be quietly observing, tracking me in ways too subtle to name. Locals and visitors describe similar sensations, unexpected sounds, an almost sentient stillness, and a feeling that Deerfield hasn't fully let go of its past. Near the remnants of a farmhouse, the quiet pressed down so strongly I could hear the faint echo of my heartbeat in the open air. Nothing moved, yet the town felt alive in a patient, deliberate way. Each metallic clink, each shadow, each subtle shift in air added to the cumulative weight, making it impossible to ignore. Even after leaving, that weight lingered, settling into my thoughts long after the prairie faded behind me. And sometimes I wonder, is Deerfield a place that quietly refuses to release the memory of those who lived there, letting visitors carry pieces of its past, whether they realize it or not?
10 Leadville, Colorado. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at Leadville, Colorado was the sudden drop in temperature as I entered the high-altitude town. The air was thin and biting, making each breath feel deliberate, almost sharp against my lungs. For reasons I couldn't explain, my body stiffened, like the town itself was assessing me before I even stepped onto its historic streets. Even with sunlight glinting off the old buildings, a subtle tension hung in the shadows, and every creak of the wooden sidewalks seemed amplified. Leadville was founded in 1877 as a silver mining town and quickly became one of the most prosperous communities in the Rockies. At its peak, thousands of miners and their families lived there, supported by hotels, saloons, and stores. Life was brutal. Harsh winters, avalanches, and isolation made survival a daily challenge. When silver prices fell in the late 19th century and mining operations declined, people gradually left. Buildings were abandoned rather than dismantled, leaving the town frozen mid-activity, a silent witness to human ambition and the passage of time. That history is visible in the weathered facades, rusted signage, and the occasional remaining wagon or tool. But standing there now, it's more than history. It feels like the town itself carries a memory, subtle and patient. As I wandered past the old courthouse, a metallic clink echoed from somewhere above, a sharp, deliberate note that didn't match my own footsteps. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it wasn't. Shadows lingered in corners where none should exist, and the air pressed heavier in certain spots, tugging at my chest. I slowed my breathing instinctively, aware that the town might be quietly observing, measuring me in ways too subtle to name. Locals and visitors report the same sensation, sounds that don't align with the visible environment, air that feels almost aware, and a sense that Leadville hasn't fully released the people who once lived there. Near the remains of an old saloon, the quiet pressed down so strongly I could hear the faint echo of my heartbeat in the wooden walls. Nothing moved, yet the town felt alive in a patient, deliberate way. Each metallic clink, each shifting shadow, each subtle change in the air added to the cumulative weight, making it impossible to ignore. Even after leaving, that weight lingered, settling into my thoughts long after the mountains faded behind me. And sometimes I wonder, is Leadville a place that quietly keeps the memory of its residents alive, letting visitors carry a piece of its past, whether they realize it or not? As we leave these forgotten towns behind, it's hard not to feel the weight of their history pressing quietly on us. Each cabin, street, and shadow carries the stories of people who lived, struggled, and left pieces of themselves behind. These places may be abandoned, but their presence lingers in the air, the wind, and the silence. So I ask you,
If you walked these streets alone, would you feel the past reaching out to you too?